It is May 4th, 1953, and the winners of the traditional Pulitzer Prizes are announced in the United States. In the fiction category, it goes to 53-year-old Ernest Hemingway, an American writer who managed to captivate the interwar generation of readers around the world. But now, after the war, the prevailing opinion is that his best days are behind him. Even the work for which he received the prize is prodigious, and he himself totally failed to foresee that it would bring him such success. It is not even a novel, just a novella, and in just 127 pages it tells the story of an aging fisherman, Santiago, and his lonely battle with a giant marlin, a fish similar to the swordfish. For the old man, the catch is vital after a long period of failure, and so he battles the giant, who seems to be beyond his strength, for more than 2 days. He finally overcomes it and attaches it to the side of the boat, but he no longer has the strength to defend it from the sharks, who are tearing all the flesh off it. All that's left of the fish of his life is a skeleton. The story of a man's brave, albeit futile, struggle against adversity will put the final crown on Hemingway's fame. It very impressively embodies one of the main ideas of the whole work. Man can be destroyed but not defeated. A year later, Ernest Hemingway also receives the Nobel Prize. He would live another 7 years but would not publish another book during his lifetime. Hemingway was born in 1899 in a suburb of Chicago. His mother dreamed of a career as an opera singer when she was young. Following the custom of the time not to distinguish between boys' and girls' clothing at an early age, she dressed little Ernest in his older sister's clothes and combed his hair like a girl. On the other hand, his father, a doctor, took him out into the wilderness and hunting from an early age. Both may have contributed to the later boyishness that ran throughout Hemingway's work and life. After high school, he declined to go to college and instead began writing for the Kansas City Star. It was here that he was given the foundation for the style he would later use to write his books. Short, direct sentences, an emphasis on truthfulness, no grand flourishes. It would be a complete novelty to the literary world. When the United States entered World War I in 1917, the army was not interested in Ernest because of his poor eyesight. At least he volunteered for the Red Cross. He helped in France and especially on the Italian front, where he was seriously wounded during the Great Battle on the Piave River. Despite this, he managed to drag a soldier he was treating to safety before collapsing. He was awarded the Medal of Military Merit for this, and he would use his experiences at the front and during his convalescence in Milan, where he fell madly in love with a nurse to write his novel Goodbye, Army 10 years later, which would definitely make him an acclaimed writer. Hemingway lives in many places between the wars. France. In Paris, he befriends American writers then living there, including Francis Scott Fitzgerald, and meets with writer and intellectual Gertrude Stein. She gives these young men whose lives were affected by the war at an early age the name of the lost generation. In Spain, when traveling here, you will fall in love with the country itself and its people, as well as the traditional corrida. It is its atmosphere that he uses in his first novel in 1926. In the 1930s, he buys a large house on the island of Key West off the coast of Florida. Here he writes and goes out fishing with friends for big fish, tuna, swordfish, and marlin. Some of his catches are truly spectacular. He also spends long weeks on safari, hunting big game. Here too he finds inspiration for many of his works. For example, the book The Green Hills of Africa. In 1939, he buys the Villa Finca Vigia near Havana. He would live here intermittently until 1960 and write his most famous works here. To Whom the Bell Tolls and The Old Man and the Sea. If Hemingway isn't exactly steady when it comes to where he lives, he's even worse in his relationships with women. In 25 years, he manages to marry 4 times, not to mention mistresses. The darker sides of his character are probably to blame. He falls in love with women he admires, but he is also vain, selfish, and possessive. Relationships therefore end in ruin, and Hemingway always remarries immediately after the divorce. First wife, Hadley Richardson. 8 years older than Ernest, they married in 1921, spent years together in Paris, had a son, Jack. They divorced in 1927. By then, Hemingway had been having an affair with her friend Pauline for 2 years. Second wife, Pauline Pfeiffer. 5 years older, they married right away in 1927. They had 2 sons, Patrick and Gregory, a convinced Catholic. When Hemingway began living with war correspondent Martha Gellhorn, she long refused to divorce. She finally gave the nod in 1940. Third wife, Martha Gellhorn. They married 3 weeks after Hemingway's divorce, one of the most respected war journalists of the 20th century. She was 9 years younger than him. They had no children. She was the one Hemingway's male ego clashed with the most. She was also the only one who broke up with him. Not the other way around. It happened in 1945. The fourth wife, Mary Walsh, a journalist, they married in 1946, and she lasted with him until her death. She was the same age as Martha, but much less ambitious. By the mid-1950s, when Hemingway was already failing health-wise, she had turned into a caring nurse. Does all this seem like a few lifetimes? Make no mistake, we're not done yet. In 1937, Hemingway is doing a report on the Spanish Civil War. Far from being just an observer, he helps Republicans and interbrigadistas from all over the world fight Franco's fascists in every way he can. Here he finds the material for his novel To Whom the Bell Tolls, and also establishes relations with the Soviets, which, according to records, would later result in collaboration with their secret service. Anyway, if he was an agent, his code name should have been Argo. He did not help the Soviets in any way. He never had any important information. He spent the beginning of the war in Cuba, and at the end he went to Europe as a correspondent. But rather to show off in front of his wife Martha. She was the only journalist to reach the site of the Allied invasion of Normandy. Ernest observed events from a distance. It wasn't until late July 44 that he set out with the American infantry for Paris. Again, he was not just a non-participating journalist. He even organized the local militia in the town of Rambouillet near Paris. After the war, he was questioned for this, but was eventually cleared, and even given further honors. His relationship with Martha finally broke down at the end of the war, and he now lived with his last wife Mary, and occasionally with a young 19-year-old Miss Adriana Ivancic, whom he had met in Italy. It was she who had a great influence on Hemingway's creative flowering, which resulted in both the Pulitzer and Nobel Prizes. A major turning point in his life came in 1954. That's when he becomes the victim of 2 plane crashes in 2 days in Africa. Even if word gets out in America that he died in the second one, Hemingway survives. But the injuries he sustains, especially severe concussions and a spinal fluid leak, scar him permanently. He begins to suffer from depression and has a fixed idea that the FBI is watching him. Years later, this turns out to be true, but not nearly to the extent he thought. He undergoes repeated treatments in the psychiatric ward of the prestigious Mayo Clinic, receiving 15 electric shocks to the head. He leaves the clinic in 1960 in an impoverished state. In addition to the mental problems, there are the residues of the illnesses he has suffered. Malaria, dysentery and skin cancer, and the problems associated with heavy drinking, high blood pressure, liver and kidney disease, diabetes. And to make matters worse, there are also long-standing problems with eyesight. Events are rapidly coming to a tragic end. On July 2, 1961, Ernest Hemingway picked up his favorite rifle, walked into the foyer of his Idaho home, and shot himself in the head. The doctor on call classified it as an accident, but no one around the author doubted it was suicide. It made perfect sense to everyone that Ernest Hemingway, the man and the writer, decided to create the last lines of his extraordinary life story himself, and in his own way.